Mom, we need to talk. We've decided to sell the house. We found a nice place for you at the Oakwood Senior Living Facility. You need to start packing. Your room is the first one we need to stage for the photographers. The line went dead, but I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the hollow hum of nothing. The words weren't just words. They were stones, thrown one by one, and I was too slow, too old to dodge them. Just a few hours earlier, the silence in the house had been one of anticipation. Now, it was the silence of a tomb. On my 70th birthday, I sat at the head of the long oak dining table I had polished for 5 decades, a ritual passed down from my mother. It was set for 10. The good china, the one with the tiny hand-painted violets, was laid out on the Irish linen my late husband Robert had bought me on a trip to Dublin. I'd told him it was too extravagant. He'd just smiled and said nothing was too extravagant for his queen. I wonder what he would say now. The roast chicken, glistening under the chandelier, had long since grown cold. Its skin, once perfectly crisp, was now a sad, deflated thing. The rosemary potatoes I'd picked from my own garden were hard little lumps in the serving bowl. The scent of roasted garlic and thyme, which had filled the house with such promise earlier, now just smelled of decay. I had baked a 3-layer lemon cake with buttercream frosting, Jessica's favorite. It sat on the sideboard, untouched, its candles unlit, a monument to a celebration that never happened. The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Robert's parents, chimed 8. Each bong echoed in the cavernous space, a lonely drumbeat marking another hour of my foolish hope. I had made excuses for them. At 6, it was traffic. At 7, it was a last-minute work thing for David. At 7:30, I imagined Karen having trouble with her dress, or Jessica misplacing her phone. I pictured them in my mind, laughing in the car, on their way to me, a happy family, my family. But as the light outside faded from bruised purple to an inky, starless black, the excuses shriveled up and died. No one was coming. My son David, his wife, Karen, my only granddaughter Jessica. They hadn't just forgotten. A forgotten birthday earns a frantic, apologetic call the next day. This felt different. This was deliberate. The silence was a statement. I looked at the 10 empty chairs, each one a ghost. A chair for David, who used to scrape it against the floor as a boy, driving Robert mad. A chair for Karen, who always complimented my cooking while barely touching her food. A chair for Jessica, who I taught to read in this very room, her small head bent over a book in my lap. The other chairs were for friends who had drifted away or passed on, but I set them anyway, a tradition, a hope, a pathetic one, it turned out. I didn't move. I just sat there, the queen of a silent, empty kingdom, the cold seeping from the marble floor up into my bones. The house, Willow Creek, had been my life's work as much as my garden had. Every scuff on the floorboard, every faint watermark on the ceiling held a memory. David's first steps, Jessica's 16th birthday party, Robert's booming laughter during Christmas dinners. Now, the memories felt like accusations. How could you let it come to this? Sometime after 9, my phone, which had been a dead black rectangle on the table all evening, buzzed. Not a call, a notification. My hand trembled as I picked it up. For a wild, stupid second, I thought it might be a text. "So sorry, Mom. On our way." But it wasn't. It was Instagram. My thumb, clumsy on the screen, opened the app. And there it was. Jessica's story. The image was so bright, it made me flinch. My family, bathed in the golden, liquid light of a setting sun. They were on a magnificent yacht, the kind you see in magazines. The deep blue sea stretched out behind them, calm and endless. Karen, her blonde hair artfully tousled by the sea breeze, was holding up a champagne flute, her smile wide and artificial. David, my David, had his arm wrapped tightly around a beaming Jessica, his face flush with happiness. He was wearing the expensive watch I'd given him for his 40th. There were other people too, friends of theirs I vaguely recognized, all of them laughing, celebrating. Then I saw the caption, written in a cheerful white script that floated over the image like a brand. "Family first, celebrating life." I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. My mind struggled to connect the two realities. My dark, silent dining room, with its cold food and empty chairs, and this vibrant, sun-drenched world of joy and laughter. Family first. The words were a physical blow. They weren't just celebrating without me. They were celebrating their life, a life in which I was no longer a part. They had amputated me, and this picture was the proof. They were celebrating the amputation. I clicked on Jessica's profile. Another photo posted just an hour ago. The whole family, posing at a restaurant on the waterfront, a different restaurant, a pre-yacht dinner, perhaps. Jessica's arm was around Karen, and she'd tagged her mother. "Best mom in the world," the caption read, with a heart emoji. I thought of the lemon cake on my sideboard. I felt a wave of nausea. I wasn't just forgotten. I was erased. Replaced. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't an oversight. It was a performance. A carefully curated declaration, posted for the world to see, that I was nothing to them. I put the phone down, my hand shaking so badly it clattered against the china plate. The sound was obscenely loud in the silence. I looked at my reflection in the dark window pane. A tired old woman with a fool's hope in her eyes. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage for a play where the lead actress had been fired but hadn't been told to leave the set. That's when the phone finally rang. Its shrill cry cut through the stillness, making my heart leap into my throat. It was David. My hand flew to my chest, a stupid, reflexive gesture of relief. See? I was wrong. He was calling. "David?" I answered, my voice a croak. "Mom," he said. There was no warmth, no happy birthday, no sorry we're late. Just that one word, flat and cool as a river stone. It was his business voice, the one he used with contractors and subordinates. "We need to talk," he continued, not waiting for a response. "Karen and I have been discussing things, and we've made a decision." I waited, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. The silence on his end was punctuated by the faint sound of music and distant laughter. He was still at the party. He was calling me from the party. "We're selling the house," he said. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "Sell? Willow Creek? David? What are you talking about? This is our home. Your father built this home for us." "The market's too good to pass up, Mom. It's a smart financial move. It's a waste of space for just one person, you have to admit." His tone was one of strained patience, as if explaining a simple concept to a difficult child. "And we can't keep up with the maintenance anymore. It's a money pit." My mind raced. "But where would I go?" "We've taken care of that," he said, the efficiency in his voice like a blade. "We found a nice place for you. The Oakwood Senior Living Facility. It's very highly rated. You'll have your own room, 3 meals a day. You won't have to worry about a thing." Oakwood. I'd driven past it, a sterile brick building with perfectly manicured, lifeless lawns, a place where people went to wait to die. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was being disposed of, like old furniture, like the cold, uneaten chicken on my dining table. "David, please," I whispered. "Don't do this." "The decision is made, Mom," he said, his voice hardening. The laughter in the background seemed to get louder. "The realtor is coming on Friday to take pictures. We need to start staging the place to get the best price." He paused, and for a moment I thought he might show a flicker of empathy. I was wrong. "You need to start packing," he said, his voice dropping to that flat, business-like tone again. "And listen, this is important. Your room is the first one we need to stage for the photographers. It has the best natural light. So can you have your personal things cleared out by Thursday? Just box them up. We'll move them to storage for now." And that was it. The final stone. My room. The room where I slept beside his father for 47 years. The room where I rocked him to sleep as a baby. And it was now just a sales feature, an asset with good lighting. He wasn't just taking my home. He was asking me to help him do it. To pack up my own life. To erase myself from my own home. To make it more palatable for strangers. The line went dead. He'd hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, in the center of the silent dining room. The ghost of my family banquet surrounded me. The beautiful house, the priceless memories, the carefully prepared meal. It was all an illusion. The truth was a yacht I wasn't on, a cold voice on the phone, and an ultimatum. Pack up your life. Your existence is inconvenient. Family first. Just not you. You are not family. Before I was a widow, before I was the forgotten woman waiting by a silent phone, I had a name that was spoken with respect in lecture halls and hushed reverence in greenhouses. I am Chua Lam. But long before that name was just a placeholder on a legal document David wanted to discard, I was a botanist. My world was not one of silent, empty rooms, but of humid air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming life. My specialty, my soul's work, was the hybridization of orchids. My hands, these hands that now tremble slightly as I lift a cold cup of tea, were once instruments of creation. They knew the delicate, almost imperceptible weight of pollen on the tip of a fine brush. They could coax life from the most stubborn of seeds, could graft and splice and nurture a vision into a living, breathing bloom of impossible color. The Willow Creek Estate, this house that has become my prison, was never just a home. It was my canvas, my laboratory, my sanctuary. I didn't just move into a house with a yard. I sculpted the very land itself. I designed every winding path, chose every stone for the low walls that bordered the flower beds, and understood the unique language of the sun and shade in every corner of the property. I remember the day Robert first brought me here. The house was grand, yes, but it was the land that captured me. It was a wild, untamed space, a blank page. He saw a symbol of his success. I saw a promise, a place to put down roots, both literally and figuratively. Over the years, that promise blossomed under my care. I created the Starlight Garden, filled with white and pale yellow night-blooming flowers that seemed to drink the moonlight. The Serenity Pond, where water lilies I had crossbred myself opened their pink and cream petals to the morning sun. But the heart of it all, my truest legacy, was the Orchid House, a glass cathedral dedicated to my passion. Inside, I orchestrated a symphony of evolution. I created the Robert's Pride, a Cattleya orchid with petals the color of a deep burgundy wine, so velvety they looked like fabric. It was my gift to him on our 10th anniversary. He paraded it in front of his business partners, beaming, accepting their congratulations, as if he'd willed it into existence himself. I didn't mind. His pride was my pride. I created the David's Dawn, a smaller, more resilient phalaenopsis with streaks of sunrise orange and soft yellow to celebrate the birth of our son. It was the first flower David ever touched, his tiny infant fingers patting the waxy petal with innocent curiosity. Each creation was a chapter of my life. I gave up a tenured position at a prestigious university to be here, to build this life. I can still recall the scent of my office, old books, drying plant specimens, and the faint, clean smell of chalk dust. I remember the faces of my students, bright and eager. My colleagues argued with me, pleaded with me not to go. "You're at the peak of your career, Chua," my mentor, Dr. Albright, had said, his voice laced with genuine concern. "Don't trade a legacy for a life in a man's shadow." I had smiled, confident and full of love. "It's not a trade, it's an investment," I told him. An investment in my family. I saw it as a fair exchange, love for ambition. Robert was a force of nature, a brilliant, charismatic man who was building an empire. He needed a partner, a stable home, a gracious hostess, and David, my beautiful boy, needed his mother. I convinced myself that my work in the garden was just as important, just as valid, as any paper I could publish or any lecture I could give. I was creating beauty, creating a home. I believed that was the greatest contribution a woman could make. For a long time, that belief was enough. It filled my days and gave me a sense of quiet purpose. I was the silent partner, the unseen foundation upon which our family's perfect life was built. My late husband, Robert, was an artist. Not with flowers like me, but with people. His medium was perception. In public, he was a masterpiece of charm and effortless confidence. He could command a boardroom with a soft-spoken sentence and win over the most cynical investor with a disarming smile and a firm handshake. He made everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. He made me feel that way too, in the beginning. He would come home, his eyes tired from a day of corporate battles, and seek me out in the garden. "Show me what you've created today, my love." he'd say, his voice a low, soothing balm. He'd listen, seemingly fascinated, as I explained the delicate process of cross-pollinating a new vanilla orchid. He made my passion feel seen. But his artistry had a darker side, one reserved for the quiet, private moments within the walls of our home. It was a subtle, gradual craft of control, painted with the brushstrokes of love and protection. It began with our finances. I had my own savings, a respectable portfolio from my years at the university. "Chua, my dear," he said one evening, sitting across from me at his enormous mahogany desk, the air smelling of leather and his expensive cologne. "We're a team now, a single unit. It's so inefficient, so messy, to have our assets separated like this. Let my people handle it. They're the best. It's for tax efficiency." He made it sound so practical, so logical, a simple matter of good housekeeping. I remember the weight of the pen in my hand as I signed the first set of documents. His hand rested gently on my shoulder. "Smart girl," he'd murmured, and kissed my temple, and just like that, my financial independence was absorbed into his. Brick by brick, he built my dependency. A few years later, it was the house, this house, my canvas. "It's a liability to have it in both our names, darling," he explained over a glass of wine, the fire crackling in the hearth. "With my business, we're a target. If, God forbid, something goes wrong, they could come after the house. By putting it into the corporate trust, under my name as the sole director, it's firewalled, it's protected. I'm protecting you. I'm protecting our home." He was the architect of my silence, my slow erasure. Each document I signed was another bar on the cage. He'd slide a thick sheaf of papers across the polished wood of his desk, already marked with little yellow flags. "Just sign here and here, my love. Just formalities." I never read them. Why would I? This was the man who held my hand at night, the father of my child, the man who praised my orchids. To question him would have felt like an accusation, a betrayal of the perfect trust we had supposedly built. I mistook his control for care, his possessiveness for passion. He wasn't protecting me. He was isolating me. He wasn't building a fortress to keep the world out. He was building one to keep me in. He curated my friendships, gently discouraging connections with my old, independent-minded friends from the university. "They just don't understand our life, Chua," he'd say softly. "They're a bit academic, a bit cynical." In their place, he filled our lives with the wives of his business partners, women who spoke of shopping and charity balls, not botany and scientific breakthroughs. My world grew smaller, more gilded, and more hollow. Looking back now, from this cold, silent room, the memories play out with a horrifying clarity. I see his smile, not as charming, but as predatory. I hear his reassurances, not as loving, but as manipulative. He didn't just want a wife. He wanted an asset, a beautiful, accomplished woman to have on his arm, and a dependent, powerless one to keep at home. He praised my garden because it kept me rooted to this property, my hands in the dirt instead of on my own checkbook. He celebrated my role as a mother because it kept me focused on his heir, not my own ambitions. I had willingly traded my ambition for love, but he had secretly rewritten the terms of the deal, taking both and leaving me with nothing but the illusion of a beautiful life. I now know he wasn't building a life with me. He was building my cage. A beautiful, spacious, gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. And he spent a lifetime teaching our son David not how to tend the garden, but how to lock the door. The world shrinks when you become invisible. It wasn't a sudden vanishing, more like a slow fade. My life, once a sprawling landscape of academic pursuits, global travel, and the vibrant ecosystem of my garden, had contracted to the four walls of this house, and within these walls, my presence had been compressed into the silent, awkward spaces they no longer wished to occupy. My birthday had been the formal announcement, the cutting of a ribbon on my new reality of utter irrelevance. But the days that followed were the slow, meticulous construction of my prison. My life became a rhythm of quiet humiliations, each one a small, smooth stone dropped into a well, the ripples spreading out in the dark. Dinner was the most consistent ritual. The scent of fried chicken would drift from the formal dining room, the kind that came in a red and white bucket, a family meal I was no longer a part of. I'd hear the murmur of their voices, the sharp, bright sound of Jessica's laughter, the deeper cadence of David's, the clinking of Karen's wine glass against her teeth. My own dinner would be waiting for me on the cold granite countertop of the kitchen island. A plate with whatever was left over. A single lukewarm chicken wing, its skin gone soft and greasy. A spoonful of coleslaw swimming in a pool of its own watery dressing. Sometimes, just a pile of cold fries. They didn't even set a place for me at the kitchen table. It was an unspoken rule. The kitchen was my designated zone, but my comfort within it was not a consideration. I would eat standing up, leaning against the counter, looking out the window at the encroaching twilight. My plate was melamine, a durable pale blue plastic thing that felt like a child's toy in my hands. My cup was the same. Meanwhile, I could hear the faint, elegant chime of real silverware on porcelain from the other room. They never said, "Mom, you can't eat with us." They never had to. They simply set the dining table for 3 and left my portion on the counter, a silent, unassailable decree. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a cruelty so quiet it could almost be mistaken for thoughtlessness. But it was not. It was deliberate. It was architecture. Some nights, I would try to breach the wall. I'd finish my meager meal, rinse my plastic plate in the sink, and drift toward the living room, starved for a crumb of human connection. I'd stand in the doorway, a ghost in my own home. "Did you have a good day, David?" I'd ask, my voice sounding rusty from disuse. He wouldn't look away from the giant television screen that dominated the wall. He'd grunt, his eyes fixed on some violent, flashing action movie. Karen, curled up beside him, would sigh, a small, sharp exhalation of pure annoyance. She'd shift her position on the sofa, turning her body just slightly away from me, a human barrier between my son and me. "We're trying to watch this, Chualam," she'd say. Her voice, honey-sweet, but laced with poison. She always used my first name, never Mom. It was another small assertion of power, a reminder that I was not family, but an inconvenient tenant. The television itself was another weapon. The remote was a sacred object, always clutched in David's or Karen's hand. They had put a parental lock on the system, not for Jessica, but for me. The code was a secret I wasn't privy to. If I happened to be in the living room alone, the screen was a black, silent mirror reflecting my own tired face. I couldn't watch the gardening shows I loved, or the old black and white films that reminded me of my life with Robert, before it had curdled. My entertainment was at their discretion, a privilege, not a right. The worst moments, the ones that lodged themselves like shards of glass in my memory, came from Jessica. She lived her life through a screen, broadcasting her every thought to a faceless audience online. Her room was a studio, with a ring light that cast a perpetual angelic glow, and a microphone that looked like something from a professional radio station. One evening, I was walking down the hallway, my old joints aching, on my way to fetch a glass of water. Her door was slightly ajar, and I could hear her high, animated voice. "Oh my God, you guys are crazy. No, I did not. Shut up, Chad." She laughed, a loud, performative sound designed for her audience. A wave of loneliness washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. I just wanted to see her face, to see my granddaughter. I pushed the door open a few more inches, my movements slow and silent. I saw her in profile, bathed in the white light of her monitor, a headset clamped over her ears. I must have drifted into the edge of her camera's view. I didn't realize it until I saw her expression shift. Her eyes darted to one of her screens, and a small, cruel smirk played on her lips. Through her headset, I could hear the tinny, distorted voice of one of her online friends. The words were faint, but unmistakable. "OMG, Jess, is that the creepy grandma you were talking about?" The world stopped. Creepy grandma. The words hung in the air, invisible and toxic. I saw Jessica's reaction. She didn't defend me. She didn't get angry. She laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. She turned her camera away from the door with a flick of her wrist. "Guys, chill," she said into her microphone, still smiling. Then she turned her head toward me, her eyes cold and hard. The smile was gone, replaced by a mask of pure irritation. "Grandma, can you not?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I'm live. You're totally killing the vibe." She got up, walked to the door, and pushed it shut in my face. The click of the latch echoed in the silent hallway. It felt as loud as a slamming iron gate. I stood there in the darkness, my hand still halfway to my mouth. I could hear her muffled voice through the door, laughing again, reassuring her audience, moving on. The vibe had been restored. My humiliation was just a momentary glitch in her broadcast. I didn't get my glass of water. I turned around and walked back to my room, my throat thick with a thirst that water couldn't quench. Each day, a new cut, a slow, methodical bleeding of my spirit. They didn't need to raise their voices. Their contempt was in the silence, in the leftovers, in a door clicked shut. They were making me disappear, one casual cruelty at a time. My only escape was the garden. Out there, surrounded by the life I had cultivated, I could breathe. The soil under my fingernails was real. The velvety texture of a rose petal, the intricate architecture of an orchid bloom. These were my truths. The garden was the one place my existence still had weight and meaning. It was my life's work, a living library of my passions, my griefs, my patient, quiet joys. Each plant was a memory. The Robert's charm climbing rose, which I bred the year after he died. Its petals the exact shade of the cravats he used to wear. The David's Dawn azaleas, planted when he was born, their blooms as bright and promising as his future once seemed. The whole space was a testament to a life lived, a heart that had loved and lost. It was my legacy, and soon I would learn it was scheduled for demolition. The discovery came, as these things often did, when they thought I was out of earshot. It was a cool evening. I was in the small glass sunroom that connected the kitchen to the back patio, carefully repotting my prized midnight serenade orchid, a hybrid I'd spent a decade perfecting. The sun had set, and the sunroom was dark, but I knew the feel of the roots and the soil by heart. Outside on the patio, David and Karen had lit their ridiculous tiki torches and were drinking wine. They often sat out there, their voices carrying clearly through the glass, speaking about the house and their future as if I were a piece of furniture, deaf and dumb. "I was on Pinterest today," Karen said. Her voice was giddy with a predatory excitement. I heard the swipe of a finger across a tablet screen. "Look at this, honey. We could bulldoze this entire back garden mess." My hands froze in the bag of potting soil. A mess. She called my garden a mess. "It's such a waste of prime real estate," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "All these thorny, overgrown bushes. It's so dated. We could put in a proper infinity pool right here. It would flow right from the edge of the patio. Imagine the parties we could have, David. It would add so much value to the property." I held my breath, praying David would defend me, that he would remember the summer afternoons spent helping me weed, the pride on his face when the David's Dawn azaleas first bloomed. I waited for him to say, "No, Karen, that's Mom's life's work. We can't destroy it." The silence stretched for a moment, and then I heard his reply. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. "You're right," he said, his voice completely devoid of sentiment. "It's a good idea. Mom's old-fashioned roses are just weeds anyway. They're a total eyesore." Weeds. The word struck me with the physical force of a blow. My roses, my meticulously bred prize-winning hybrids. Weeds. "And all the time she spends out here," he went on, his tone now one of clinical assessment, "pottering around with dirt and fertilizer. For what? It's just dirt and thorns. This whole area could be so much more functional, profitable." Profitable. He had taken the one thing I had left, the sanctuary of my soul, and slapped a price tag on it. He was looking at my heart and calculating its resale value. Karen giggled, a sound like glass shattering. "Exactly. We'll get the surveyors in as soon as the house sale is finalized. We can have it all cleared out in a week." I sank down onto the cool, tiled floor of the dark sunroom, the bag of soil spilling around me. I couldn't feel my legs. My breath came in ragged, silent gasps. They weren't just planning to put me in a home. They were planning to erase me, to plow over my entire history, to salt the earth where my memories grew, and to replace it with a sterile, blue, chlorinated monument to their own selfish desires. They weren't just waiting for me to be gone, they were actively digging my grave while I was still here to watch. I looked through the glass at my garden, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. I saw the silhouettes of the plants I had nurtured from seeds, the flowers I had coaxed into existence. They stood there, silent and beautiful, completely unaware of the death sentence that had just been passed upon them. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The despair, the suffocating weight of their contempt, didn't vanish, but it began to harden. It cooled and compressed from a formless, crippling grief into something solid, something sharp. The gardener who tends her plants knows that sometimes, to save the garden, you have to do more than just pull the weeds. You have to rip them out by the root. The phone call was a splinter under my nail. David's voice, impatient and thin through the speaker, had no warmth, only the sharp edges of a demand. "Mom, the realtor is coming on Friday to take photos. The whole house needs to be perfect, especially Dad's old study. She said it smells like old books and mothballs. I need you to clear it out, box everything up. We need the room to look spacious and neutral. Get it done." He didn't wait for a reply. The click of the disconnect was his only goodbye. Get it done. Not how are you, not can you manage, just an order, another stone laid on the pile of my insignificance. I stood for a long moment in the hallway, the silence of the house pressing in. Robert's study, it had been his sanctuary, his fortress. In the 3 years since his death, I had barely stepped inside. The door had remained closed, a silent monument to a man I was beginning to realize I had never truly known. The family treated it like a tomb, but for David, it was just square footage, a line item on a sales brochure. Pushing the heavy oak door open, a scent washed over me that was purely Robert. Not just the dust and decaying paper David had so crudely described, but something deeper. The faint, pleasant bitterness of old leather from his armchair, the cedar notes from his humidor, and beneath it all, the ghost of his cologne, a scent that had once meant safety and now felt like the air in a sealed crypt. The room was dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the world. My world. For years I had cultivated life, coaxing orchids to bloom in the humid air of the greenhouse. This room was the opposite. It was a place where things ended, where ideas were sealed in paper, where life was held in suspension. I started with the shelves, a wall of books from floor to ceiling, a testament to his intellect, or perhaps his vanity. I pulled them down one by one, the weight of each volume a physical burden. Biographies of powerful men, histories of forgotten wars, financial texts with titles I couldn't comprehend. My hands, accustomed to the delicate work of potting and pruning, felt clumsy and coarse against the fragile paper. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light I'd allowed in, tiny ghosts swirling in the stale air. Each book I removed felt like peeling a layer from a man who was already gone, an archaeology of a stranger I had shared a bed with for 45 years. My back ached. A dull, familiar fire low in my spine. I was stacking a pile of encyclopedias, their bindings cracked and brittle, when my grip faltered. My hand slipped, and my knuckles rapped sharply against the wooden back paneling of the bookshelf. The sound wasn't the solid thud I expected. It was a hollow, resonant knock, like tapping on a drum. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. I ran my fingers over the smooth, dark wood. Nothing. It was seamless. But the sound had been wrong. Driven by a flicker of curiosity, a feeling so alien it felt like a spark in a damp cave, I pushed aside the remaining books on that shelf. I ran my hands over the paneling again, pressing, searching. My fingers, sensitive from decades of feeling for the slightest imperfection on a leaf or stem, found it. A tiny, almost imperceptible seam along the edge of the panel. I pressed harder. There was a faint click, and the panel swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a cavity within the wall. And there, nestled in the darkness, was a small, black box. It was a digital safe, modern and sleek, its matte finish and glowing keypad a jarring intrusion in this world of mahogany and aged leather. I had never seen it before. And yet, a memory surfaced, hazy and indistinct, like a dream, half remembered upon waking. Robert, years ago, working in here late at night, the sound of a drill. His voice when I'd asked what he was doing. Just installing something for sensitive work documents, my love. Nothing for you to worry your pretty head about. And I hadn't. I had accepted it, just as I had accepted everything. My role was the garden. His was the world of secrets locked in rooms like this. I stared at the keypad, a string of numbers, a code. What could it be? Our anniversary? David's birthday? I tried them both. Each time a small red light blinked and a disapproving beep echoed in the silent room. I felt a surge of hopeless frustration. It was another one of his locks, another door I wasn't meant to open. I was about to give up, to swing the panel shut and entomb his secret forever, when another memory broke the surface. This one was sharp, cold, and terrible. It was from decades ago. A hospital room, sterile and white. The crushing silence after the doctor had left. The weight of Robert's hand on my shoulder, heavy and proprietary. He had leaned in, his voice a low whisper against my ear, a secret shared in the echoing chamber of our grief. We will never speak of this to anyone, Chua. This pain is ours alone. But we will never forget this day. It is etched into us. He'd told me a date I was to hold on to, a password to our shared tragedy. The day our first child, a son, was delivered into the world, already an angel, silent and still. A grief so profound, so absolute, it had become a secret chamber in our marriage, a place only we could enter. Now I realized with a jolt that chilled me to the bone, he had made it a literal one. My fingers trembled as I reached for the keypad again. My own grief felt like a violation, a tool being used to pick a lock. Was this what he intended? For our deepest wound to be the key to his deepest secrets? I typed in the numbers. Month, day, year. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the small red light turned green, and with a soft mechanical whir, the lock disengaged. The heavy little door swung open. The air that drifted out didn't smell of dust or decay. It smelled of nothing. A sterile void. My heart was pounding, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against cold metal and cool, smooth leather. I pulled the contents out and placed them on the dusty floor beside me. It wasn't a will. There was no letter of confession, no sentimental farewell. The first object was a thick, leather-bound ledger, the kind I'd seen in old black-and-white movies, the kind used for serious, meticulous accounting. I opened it. The pages were filled not with names and figures, but with columns of cryptic codes, alphanumeric strings, and symbols that meant nothing to me. It was a language I didn't speak, from a world I hadn't known existed. Beneath the ledger was a stack of external hard drives, 5 of them, identical and black. And they were heavy, solid, and completely impersonal. They felt cold to the touch, like river stones. There were no labels, no clues as to their contents, just silent plastic blocks promising nothing but containing, I suspected, everything. The last item was a cheap, disposable burner phone, the kind of thing you see in spy thrillers, used once and then tossed into a river. It was flimsy, lightweight, a stark contrast to the solid, expensive smartphone Robert had always carried. Why would a man like him need a phone like this? The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. I pressed the power button on the side. The screen flickered to life, its bright, artificial glow shockingly vibrant in the dim study. And in the top corner, a detail that made my blood run cold. The battery was at 90%. After 3 years of sitting in a dark, forgotten safe, it was still holding a charge. It had been left here for me. It had been waiting. And then I saw it. One unread message. My thumb hovered over the screen, a millimeter of space separating me from a truth I was suddenly terrified to know. The timestamp was from the day after Robert's funeral. 3 years ago. A message from a ghost, sent to a ghost. I took a breath that felt like breathing ground glass, and I opened it. The sender was simply M. The message was short, blunt and devastating. It read, "If you're reading this, he's dead. The ledger is your key. The drives are his cage. Call me." I read it again and again. The words swam before my eyes. The ledger is your key. A key to what? The codes? The secrets? The drives are his cage. A cage. The word Robert had used for my greenhouse. "Your beautiful gilded cage," he would say with a smile that never reached his eyes. But this message implied something else. Was Robert the jailer, or the one imprisoned? Was he protecting me with all his secrets and his locks, or was he caging me? The distinction, which had once seemed so clear, was now gone, blurred into a terrifying gray. Who was M? The name meant nothing to me. A friend, an enemy, a partner. The image I had held of my husband, the charming, successful, controlling man I had loved and feared and obeyed for nearly half a century, began to fracture. The man who had convinced me to sign away my name from every deed, every account, putting it all into a complex trust he controlled, telling me it was to protect me, to simplify my life. The man who had clipped my wings, convincing me to give up my promising career in botany for the more important work of raising his son and managing his home. Every memory was now tainted with this new, terrible suspicion. My greatest mistake hadn't been a single act, but a lifetime of passive trust, of willful blindness. I had let him build the cage around me, and I had called it a home. I sat there on the floor of his study, surrounded by the debris of his life and the shards of my own, for what felt like hours. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard resolve. I could not stay here. I could not let David and Karen walk in and find this. They who had called my life's work weeds were not fit to witness the unraveling of their fathers. I needed money. My name was on no accounts. I had no credit cards of my own. But Robert, in his foresight or his paranoia, had given me one last tool. "For a real emergency," he'd said, pressing a thick envelope into my hand years ago. "Not for groceries, not for a new dress, only for when the world is ending. Hide it somewhere no one would ever look." I had hidden it under a loose floorboard in the back of my own closet, beneath a stack of old gardening magazines. The world, as I knew it, was ending. With the hard drives tucked into my handbag and the cash in a pocket, I moved like a spy in my own home. I slipped out the back door, through the garden that was my only true sanctuary, and walked the mile to the bus stop, avoiding the streets where I might be seen by a neighbor. The bus ride was a journey through a foreign country. It carried me away from the manicured lawns and silent, imposing houses of Willow Creek, and plunged me into the loud, chaotic, anonymous heart of the city. The faces on the bus were tired, worn, etched with struggles I had been sheltered from my entire life. I felt like a ghost, invisible, a 70-year-old woman in a tweed coat, clutching a handbag full of secrets, on her way to a place she had no business being. I found the address M had not provided, but that my desperation had led me to find online. A discreet 24-hour tech repair shop, tucked away on a gritty side street that smelled of damp pavement and exhaust fumes. The window was dark, the signs handwritten. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. Wires snaked across the floor and hung from the ceiling like jungle vines. A young man sat behind the counter, bathed in the glow of a half-dozen monitors, his face pale and intelligent. He had rings in his ears and a tattoo of a circuit board crawling up his neck. He looked up as I entered, his eyes taking in my pearl earrings and sensible shoes with a flicker of amusement. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice laced with a bored cynicism that probably came from seeing every kind of desperation the city had to offer. I opened my handbag and placed one of the hard drives on the counter between us. "I need to know what's on these," I said, my own voice sounding frail and reedy in the small space. "There are 5 of them, and they're encrypted." He picked it up, turning it over in his long, nimble fingers. He plugged it into a port on a machine that looked like a Frankenstein's monster of computer parts. He typed for a few moments, his eyes scanning the lines of code that appeared on his screen. Then he let out a low whistle, a sound that cut through the low hum of the machines. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me, really looked at me. for the first time. The amusement was gone, replaced by something like professional respect and a hint of caution. "Lady," he said, his voice dropping. "This isn't your standard password protection. This is military-grade multi-layer encryption, AES 256, probably with a few custom security protocols I haven't seen before. This is the kind of thing governments use. To crack this, it's not going to be quick, and it's not going to be cheap." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The last of my hope was beginning to fray. "How much?" He named a price that made the air leave my lungs. $5,000. Cash. Up front. And I'm not promising anything. This is a deep, dark box. Whatever is on here, someone went to an incredible amount of trouble to make sure it was never found. You need to ask yourself if you're sure you want to open it. Some things are better left buried. This was it. The precipice. Behind me was the life I knew. A life of quiet humiliation, of being slowly erased by my own family. A life of waiting to be disposed of. In front of me was a dark, terrifying unknown. A truth so dangerous it had been locked away with military-grade encryption by the man I'd married. Leo was right. It was a box, a Pandora's box, and opening it could unleash horrors I couldn't even imagine. For a moment, my own fear paralyzed me. The fear of what I would find, the guilt of unearthing my husband's secrets, the sheer terror of stepping so far out of the life that had been prescribed for me. The image of Jessica's Instagram post flashed in my mind. Family is everything. A cheerful, brutal lie. I thought of David's cold voice on the phone, the casual cruelty of their plan to sweep my garden away for a swimming pool. They were not just putting me in a home, they were burying me alive. My fear of the unknown was finally, blessedly, eclipsed by my terror of the known. I met the young man's gaze. My own eyes, which had for years been downcast and vacant, felt clear and focused. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the thick envelope of cash, the last vestige of Robert's control, now repurposed as my key to freedom. I pushed it across the counter. The plastic crinkled in the silence. "I'm sure," I said, and my voice did not tremble. "I have to know." He held my gaze for a long second, then gave a slow, single nod. He took the envelope and, without counting it, swept the hard drives into a plastic bin. "All right, lady, give me your number." "I'll call you when I have something." He handed me a simple numbered claim ticket, a flimsy piece of paper that now felt like the most important document in my life. Walking out of the shop and back into the harsh light of the city, I felt utterly exposed. I had handed the only key I possessed, the last of my money, to a complete stranger with a tattoo on his neck. I had nothing left but a claim ticket and a burner phone with one terrifying message on it. The journey home on the bus was a blur. I was a ghost returning to her own haunting. I had to walk back into that house, into the lion's den, and pretend that I had spent the day simply dusting books. I had to look my son and my daughter-in-law in the eye and feign the weakness they expected of me, all while a clock was ticking in a back-alley shop in the city, counting down to an explosion that would either save me or destroy me completely. The wait, I knew, would be the hardest part of all. It was the silence before the storm. The call came on a Tuesday, a day so numbingly ordinary it felt like an insult. The phone vibrated against the worn wood of the kitchen table where I was meticulously cleaning the silver, a task I hadn't performed in years. It was a pretense of normalcy, a way to keep my hands from shaking. The caller ID was a blocked number. My heart didn't leap. It froze, a solid block of ice in my chest. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice a carefully constructed whisper of fragility. "Hello? Mrs. Lamb? This is Leo." The voice was young, taut with an energy I hadn't felt in my own body for decades. "It's done. The drives are decrypted." He paused, and the silence on the line was heavy, suffocating. I think you need to see this in person. I'm at my office. Can you come now?" There was no question. "I'm on my way." I didn't take my car. I called a ride-sharing service, an anonymous vehicle for an anonymous purpose. As the car wound through the familiar streets, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The manicured lawns, the stately homes, they all seemed like a movie set, a backdrop for a life that was proving to be a complete fiction. Leo's office was in a nondescript building downtown, sandwiched between a vape shop and a tax preparer. The air inside smelled of ozone, hot plastic, and stale coffee. Wires snaked across the floor like metallic vines, and towers of humming computers blinked with 1,000 tiny, inscrutable eyes. Leo, a young man with tired eyes and a hoodie that had seen better days, didn't waste time with pleasantries. He gestured to a chair in front of a large monitor. "I separated the files," he said, his voice low. "Audio, financial records, encrypted correspondence. The audio, it's extensive. It looks like your husband had the whole house wired, voice activated. The recordings go back years." He clicked his mouse, and a sound file opened. My own home filled the small office, but it was a version I had never heard. It was the house as it existed when I wasn't in the room. And then I heard them, David and Karen. Their voices, stripped of the false sweetness they used to my face, were sharp and ugly. Honestly, how much longer can this go on? It was Karen's voice, laced with a familiar wine-fueled impatience. "She just sits there, staring at those damn flowers. It's creepy. We need to get her evaluated. Dr. Albright is a friend of my father's. He'd sign off on incompetency in a heartbeat. Just say she's having episodes, forgetting things, a danger to herself." A bark of laughter from my son, my David. "A danger to our timeline is more like it. The market is peaking. We need to sell. If we have to get power of attorney to do it, then that's what we do. It's for her own good, really. Oakwood is a lovely place." "And the loan for the boat?" Karen pressed. "Did the papers go through?" "Signed, sealed, and delivered," David boasted. I could almost see him, leaning back, smug. "Her signature is surprisingly easy to copy. All those years of writing plant labels, I guess. It's perfect. We'll pay it all back from the sale of the house. It's just borrowing from our own inheritance when you think about it." I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. A strange and terrible calm washed over me. The woman they were describing, that frail, confused, pathetic creature, was a ghost. She had never been me. The warmth I'd once felt for my son, the embers of a mother's love, went out. Not with a blaze, but with a quiet, final hiss. There was nothing left but ash. Leo looked at me, his young face etched with pity. "There's more. Hours of it." "I believe you," I said, my voice steady. "What about the ledger?" He swiveled in his chair, pulling up a series of complex spreadsheets. "This is where it gets big league. I thought the numbers were just accounts for the estate, but they're not. They're codes. The ledger is the key. Every renovation, every art acquisition Robert made, it corresponds to a transaction in these hidden accounts. That Italian marble fountain he installed, it wasn't a $50,000 fountain. It was a $3 million wire transfer from a Cayman Islands account, laundered through the contractor and the import company. The ugly modernist sculpture on the lawn, a shell company purchased to clean $4 million for a city councilman. Robert wasn't a political aide, Mrs. Lamb. He was the bank. He was a master money launderer for the most corrupt people in this city. The ugly modernist sculpture. I had hated it. Robert had insisted it was a seminal work. I saw it now for what it was, a monument to his deceit. The entire house, my beautiful Willow Creek, wasn't a home. It was a machine. A massive, intricate machine for washing dirty money, and I had been living in the engine room for 40 years, oblivious to the noise. The betrayal was so vast, so absolute, it was almost elegant in its perfection. I looked at the burner phone sitting on the desk, the one from the safe, the last piece of the puzzle. I slid it across the desk toward Leo. "Can you make sure this is untraceable?" He nodded. "Already did. It's clean." I stood up. My legs felt strong, rooted to the ground. "Send me your invoice, Leo. Encrypted email. I'll pay it in cash." He looked from the screen to my face, and the pity in his eyes was replaced by something else. Awe. Maybe a little fear. "Mrs. Lamb." What are you going to do? I gave him a small, thin smile. It didn't reach my eyes. I'm going to do what any good gardener does, Leo. I'm going to pull up the weeds. Back in the anonymous car, I held the burner phone in my hand. It was cold and smooth. A direct line to a ghost named M. I waited until I was home, sitting in the silence of Robert's study, surrounded by the leather-bound lies that made up his library. I pressed the call button. It rang twice, then a man's voice, rough like gravel, answered. No hello, just a wary, yeah? My name is Chua Lam, I said, my voice even. I'm Robert's wife. I found your number. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing. I could picture him, older, wary, a man who had learned to expect the worst. Robert's dead, he finally grunted. What do you want? The message you sent after his funeral, I said. You told me the ledger was the key and the hard drives were his cage. You were right. I have them both. Another pause, longer this time. I heard the scrape of a chair, the flick of a lighter. Well, I'll be damned, he exhaled, the sound crackling over the cheap speaker. The old bastard actually left it for you. I never thought you had it in you, Mrs. Lamb. My name is Chua, I corrected him, a coldness in my tone that surprised even me. And you are M? Marcus, he said. My name is Marcus. Robert and I. We started together. He was the brains, I was the muscle. We built the whole system. The laundering, the contacts, all of it. Then he got greedy, decided he didn't need a partner anymore. He set me up, fed me to the feds on a lesser charge, and stole my half of everything. Left me for dead, professionally. I've spent the last 15 years working as a goddamn security consultant for suburban strip malls. The bitterness in his voice was a poison that had been brewing for a long, long time. Why help me? I asked, the question purely practical. Because Robert was a paranoid son of a bitch, Marcus said, a hint of grudging admiration in his voice. He was brilliant, and he was terrified. He trusted no one, not me, not his clients. And he damn sure didn't trust his own son. He saw David for what he was, a greedy, weak-willed parasite who would sell his own father's bones for a new sports car. He took another drag from his cigarette. That's why he built the ultimate defense, his masterpiece of paranoia. The Willow Creek estate, the art, the bank accounts. It's not in your name or his. It's all owned by a shell corporation registered in Delaware. It's called Willow Creek Holdings. And? I prompted, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. And, Marcus continued, his voice dropping with theatrical weight, Robert wrote a very special clause into the corporate bylaws. He called it his dead hand provision, a little piece of posthumous revenge. Upon his death, sole directorship of the corporation, and therefore control of every single asset, was not supposed to pass directly to David. It was structured to pass to you, his spouse. My breath hitched. But all the papers I signed. The will? Window dressing, Marcus spat. The will is for the personal effects. The corporation is a separate legal entity. The directorship is everything. But there was a catch. The clause would only activate under one condition: if you could provide irrefutable proof that the primary heir, David, was acting in a manner detrimental to the corporation's interests, wasting assets, committing fraud, trying to liquidate against the bylaws. Anything that harmed the family's, and by extension the corporation's, long-term stability. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The hard drives, the recordings, the forged signatures. They weren't just evidence of my son's betrayal. They were the key, the trigger. Robert hadn't been protecting me. He had been protecting his empire. From his own son. And I was simply the mechanism he'd chosen to do it. His posthumous insurance policy. The drives, I whispered. The drives, Marcus confirmed. He bugged his own damn house waiting for David to screw up. The paranoid bastard was betting on it. He knew his boy. He knew he'd get greedy and careless, and he left you the gun and the bullets to take him down. The question is, Chua, and the way he used my name was a challenge. Are you going to pull the trigger? A profound, chilling clarity settled over me. This wasn't about grief or hurt feelings anymore. This was about power. It was a game Robert had set up long ago, and now, finally, it was my turn to play. Yes, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. But not yet. First, I need a lawyer. Not just a good one. I need a monster. A shark. Marcus chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. I know just the woman. She's in New York. Costs a fortune. Makes grown men cry. Her name is Evelyn Reed. From that moment on, I became Meryl Streep. I was the finest actor the world had never seen. My stage was my own home. My audience, my treacherous family. My performance was that of a broken woman. The next morning, David approached me as I was listlessly watering a wilting orchid in the sunroom. He held a glossy brochure in his hand, the cover showing smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard. Oakwood Meadows, your golden years in comfort and care. He put his arm around my shoulder, his touch making my skin crawl. Mom, he said, his voice dripping with practiced, cloying sympathy. Karen and I have been so worried about you. You seem lost. We found this place. It's wonderful. They have gardens, activities, round-the-clock nursing staff. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I looked up at him, letting my eyes fill with tears. I allowed my hand to tremble as I took the brochure. I let a single tear trace a path down my cheek, a masterpiece of controlled sorrow. Oakwood, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. So, this is it then. You're sending me away. No, Mom, no, he soothed, patting my back while his eyes darted around the room, already measuring it for new furniture. We're not sending you away. We're giving you a new home, a safe place. This big house, it's too much for you. I cried. I let him see me weep, my shoulders shaking. I played the part of the grieving widow, the betrayed mother, the frail woman succumbing to the inevitable. And inside, a glacier of pure cold rage was forming. He lapped it up, his relief palpable. My weakness was his victory. The performance continued for weeks. I began to pack. I used old cardboard boxes from the cellar, the ones that smelled of damp and decay. With Karen watching me like a hawk from the doorway, her arms crossed smugly, I carefully wrapped the porcelain figurines Robert had bought me, each one a lie. I packed my books on botany, my life's passion reduced to filler in a box labeled Miski. Attic. My hands shook authentically, not from weakness, but from the effort of restraining my strength. Make sure you label everything clearly, Chua, Karen would say, her voice bright and condescending. We don't want anything important getting lost in the move to the home. Yes, dear, I would murmur, my eyes downcast. Thank you for reminding me. They grew bolder. Their contempt became more open, a foul odor in the air. They would discuss renovations in front of me as if I were a piece of furniture. The infinity pool will go right here, David announced one evening, standing where my prize-winning Midnight Serenity orchids grew. We'll have to rip out all this overgrowth, of course. A real shame, Karen added, not even trying to sound sincere. But you can't stand in the way of progress. They didn't see me. They saw a relic, a ghost already haunting the past. And that's exactly what I wanted. While they planned their pool party, I was waging a silent, secret war. Late at night, when the house was still and dark, I would retreat to Robert's study. The burner phone was my weapon. The encrypted email account Leo had set up was my command center. I spoke to Marcus regularly. He became my consigliere, my ghost in the machine. And then, I made the call to New York. A crisp, impossibly efficient voice answered on the first ring. Evelyn Reed's office. My name is Chua Lam, I said, echoing the words I'd said to Marcus, but this time they were not a plea, but an introduction. Marcus referred me. I need to speak with Ms. Reed about a corporate governance matter involving a dead-hand provision. There was a pause and I could hear the faint, rapid clicking of a keyboard. The efficiency was chilling. Hold, please. A moment later, a new voice came on the line. It was like cut glass, sharp, clear, and absolutely unbreakable. "This is Evelyn Reed. You have my attention for 5 minutes. Talk." There was no warmth, no preamble. This was a surgeon, and I was presenting a case. I laid it out with the same precision. Willow Creek Holdings, the dead hand provision, the hard drives containing proof of financial malfeasance and conspiracy to commit fraud by the primary heir, the money laundering. I left nothing out. I spoke for 4 minutes and 50 seconds. When I was done, the silence on the other end was not empty. It was analytical. It was the sound of a predator sighting its prey. "The evidence on the drives," Ms. Bush-Reed said finally, her first question. "Is it authentic? Can its chain of custody be verified?" "Yes," I said. "The technician who decrypted it can testify." "The corporate bylaws. Do you have a certified copy?" "Marcus is sourcing it from the registered agent in Delaware," I replied. "Good," she said. The word was a final judgment. "My retainer is $200,000, wired to an account I will provide via courier. Once it is received, we will be formally engaged. Do not contact me again on an open line. A new secure device will be sent to a P.O. box which you will establish tomorrow. From now on, you will do exactly as I say. You will continue your performance as a weak, defeated old woman. Let them get comfortable. Let them get arrogant. Arrogance creates paperwork, and I love paperwork." She was about to hang up. "Ms. Reed," I said quickly. "What?" she asked, her impatience a palpable force. "My son and his wife," I said, my voice steady. "When this is over, I don't want them to have anything. I want them to be erased." For the first time, I heard something other than ice in Evelyn Reed's voice. It was a flicker of professional satisfaction, a hunter's thrill. "Mrs. Lamb," she said, and the sound was almost a smile. "I believe we are going to get along splendidly." As I hung up the phone, I looked out the window of Robert's study. David and Karen were on the lawn, laughing with a landscape architect who was pointing animatedly at my garden. They were planning its destruction. They were celebrating on their own graves, and they didn't even know it. I turned away from the window. The actor had learned her lines. The stage was set. The war had begun. They were planning a party. I was planning an execution. The laughter was the worst part. It wasn't the sound of genuine joy, the kind that warms a house from the inside out. This was different. It was the sharp, brittle sound of self-congratulation, a percussive punctuation to their smug pronouncements. It echoed down the narrow basement stairs, through the floorboards, and into the dusty air where I sat on an old wooden crate. Each burst of it felt like a small stone striking my spine. Up there, in the world of light and crystal and expensive perfume, they were hosting a celebratory dinner party. Down here, in the tomb of my husband's forgotten things, I was supposedly sorting through my own. This was my designated task, my final chore before being tidied away like the rest of the clutter. I could smell the dinner. Seared scallops, probably, with a lemon butter sauce. The scent was rich, decadent, and it mingled with the musty odor of decaying paper and cold concrete that clung to my clothes. I ran a hand over a stack of Robert's old ledgers, the leather covers cracked and dry. He had loved parties like this. He thrived on the performance of it all, the grand gestures, the carefully curated guest list. David was his father's son in that regard, though he lacked Robert's subtle charm, replacing it with a blunt, unearned arrogance. From the fragments of conversation that drifted down, I could piece together the scene. The real estate agent, a man with a voice as smooth and oily as the sauces he was likely eating, was the guest of honor. I'd seen him once, when he'd come to assess the property, his eyes sweeping over my life's work in the garden with a dismissive glance that valued square footage over soul. He was the one who had priced the house, my home, at a staggering $12 million, a number that, to David and Karen, represented not a legacy, but a lottery ticket. "The infinity pool will go right there," Karen's voice floated down, high and reedy. "It will completely open up the view once we clear out. All that overgrowth." Overgrowth. She was talking about my orchids, the hybrids I'd spent 40 years cultivating, a living library of genetic artistry. To her, they were just weeds in the way of a better Instagram photo. I closed my eyes, picturing the ghost orchid I had finally coaxed into bloom last spring, its petals like spun moonlight. I had shown it to my granddaughter Jessica, hoping to share a flicker of the wonder. She had glanced at it for a second before her eyes went back to the glowing screen in her palm. Cool, she had mumbled. A cork popped upstairs. Champagne. A fresh wave of laughter followed, louder this time. I heard David's booming voice propose a toast. To sealing the deal, he declared, the words slurring slightly. And to new beginnings, Karen chimed in. The clinking of glasses was like tiny, shattering bells. A new beginning for them, built on the erasure of mine. I sat there in the gloom, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I had once believed was a partnership. Boxes of my old botanical research notes were stacked in one corner, their labels written in my own youthful, hopeful script. Dendrobium chua lamii, a species I had identified in the highlands of Vietnam, a discovery that should have been the cornerstone of my career. Robert had convinced me to put my name on his papers instead, to be the silent partner, the supportive wife. We are a team, my love, he had said, his voice a velvet cage. Your success is my success. I had believed him. I had traded my ambition for what I thought was love, only to find the contract had been written in disappearing ink. I wasn't sorting through my final things. The boxes I was meant to be packing for the Oakwood home were still empty. Instead, my hands, the hands of a gardener, the hands that knew the patient, silent work of cultivation, were busy with a different kind of preparation. I was tending to the roots of my own quiet rebellion. The hard drives Leo had decrypted were safely stored. The original ledger was not in this basement, but somewhere far more secure. And Miss Evelyn Reed was on a 7:30 p.m. train from Manhattan, due to arrive at our local station at precisely 8:42. Everything had been timed, every move choreographed. A botanist knows that for some plants to bloom, you must first create the perfect conditions for a devastating fire. I listened to their voices drone on, talking about architects and interior designers, about trips to Europe and new cars. They were dividing the spoils of a war they hadn't even realized they were fighting. They saw me as a relic, a piece of sentimental furniture that had become an inconvenience. They couldn't conceive of the fact that the relic had spent the last several weeks quietly observing them, documenting them, listening to their treachery through the very walls Robert had built to contain me. The irony was exquisite. The surveillance system my controlling husband had installed to monitor me had become the instrument of my liberation and the tool of his son's undoing. I had listened to them joke about my senility. I had heard them practice my signature. I had heard every condescending, cruel, and dismissive word. And with every word, the last vestiges of love and familial duty had withered and fallen away, leaving behind something hard, clear, and unkillable. The grandfather clock in the great hall upstairs began to chime. It was a sound I knew intimately, the deep, resonant toll that had marked the hours of my life in this house. 1, 2, 3. It was a slow, deliberate sound, a countdown. On the 9th chime, another sound cut through the noise of the party, sharper, more insistent. The doorbell. A momentary lull fell over the room above. I heard David grumble. Who the hell could that be at this hour? Maybe the caterer forgot something, Karen suggested, her voice laced with the annoyance of a hostess whose perfect party had been interrupted. I heard the scrape of a chair, then David's heavy footsteps crossing the marble floor of the foyer. I moved from my crate, silent as a shadow, and crept up the basement stairs, stopping just short of the top. The door to the main hall was ajar, and I had a clear, narrow view of the entrance. David pulled open the heavy oak door. Standing on the threshold, silhouetted against the dark night, was a figure of immaculate, severe elegance. Ms. Evelyn Reed. She wore a dark gray suit, tailored to perfection, its sharp lines a stark contrast to the casual opulence of the party. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight, flawless chignon. Her face was calm, her presence radiating a cold authority that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. David stared, confused. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone impatient. Miss Reed didn't answer him. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned past him, past a hovering, bewildered Karen, and settled on the dining room. She stepped over the threshold, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the marble. She moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a panther entering a pen of unsuspecting sheep. She bypassed my son and daughter-in-law as if they were nothing more than furniture, walking directly toward the dining table where the agent and the two potential buyers, a blandly handsome man and his jewelry-laden wife, were looking on with mild curiosity. "Mr. and Mrs. Davenport?" Mrs. Reed inquired, her voice low but carrying with perfect clarity through the now silent room. The tech mogul and his wife nodded, confused. Ms. Reed reached into her leather briefcase and produced a business card, placing it on the table beside the man's wine glass. It lay there, a stark white rectangle on the polished mahogany. "My name is Evelyn Reed. I am legal counsel for the director of Willow Creek Holdings," she said. Then, she turned her gaze to encompass the entire room. Her voice remained level, but it was edged with steel. "This property," she announced, each word a carefully placed stone, "is not and will not be for sale. I am advising you to cease all negotiations immediately. Any further discussion regarding the purchase of this estate is moot." The silence that followed was absolute. The real estate agent's jaw had gone slack, his professional smile frozen in a grotesque mask of confusion. The Davenports stared from the card to Ms. Reed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to alarm. It was David who broke the spell. A dark flush crept up his neck, his face contorting with a rage born of entitlement and humiliation. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he bellowed, his voice cracking. He took a step towards Ms. Reed, puffing out his chest. "This is my party. This is my house. You have 5 seconds to get the hell out before I have you thrown out." Karen, recovering from her initial shock, fumbled in her purse, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security, David. I'm calling them right now," she shrieked, her voice a thin, panicked wail. "Miss..." Reed didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood her ground, a pillar of calm in the storm of their histrionics. She turned her head slowly, her cool gray eyes fixing on David. She held his furious gaze for a beat, letting the weight of the moment settle. "This is not your house, Mr. Miller," she said. The statement was not an argument. It was a simple, brutal fact. From her briefcase, she produced a single document, a slim sheaf of papers bound in a simple blue cover. She placed it on the dining table with the same deliberate precision with which she had placed her card. It landed with a soft, final thud. "This," she explained to the room at large, though her eyes never left David, "is a copy of the corporate bylaws for Willow Creek Holdings, LLC. I draw your attention to Article 7, Section 4B. It is a provision sometimes referred to as a dead hand clause. It was put in place by the founder, Mr. Robert Miller, to protect the primary stakeholder and designated director from malfeasance on the part of a succeeding heir." David just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a beached fish. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of utter defeat. "Malfeasance?" Karen whispered, her call to security forgotten. Ms. Reed didn't need to answer. Instead, she took her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen once, and then their own voices filled the room. It was a recording from 3 weeks ago, captured by the microphone hidden in the library bookshelf, crystal clear. "I'm telling you, it's a perfect signature," David's voice said, thick with smug satisfaction. "The bank won't even blink. She's so out of it, she probably thinks she signed it herself." Then, Karen's laugh, that same brittle, ugly laugh I'd been listening to from the basement. "Oh my God, it's almost too easy. She just sits in her room with those stupid flowers all day. We could have her declared incompetent in a heartbeat if we needed to." The audio clip was only 30 seconds long, but it felt like an eternity. The sound of their own greed, their own callousness, hung in the air like a toxic gas. The tech mogul, Mr. Davenport, paled. He looked at his wife, a silent, horrified communication passing between them. Without a word, he pushed his chair back, stood up, and gestured for his wife to do the same. They walked out of the dining room, out of the foyer, and out the front door, which was still standing open. They didn't look back. The real estate agent, his face the color of curdled milk, gathered his papers with trembling hands and scurried after them, his lucrative commission evaporating before his eyes. The front door closed with a soft click, leaving the three of them alone with Ms. Reed in the cavernous, silent room. The remnants of their celebratory feast sat on the table like a funeral banquet. Miss Reed let the silence stretch, letting it press down on them, suffocating them with the truth of what they had just heard. David's face had crumpled. The rage was gone, replaced by a gray, doughy shock. Karen was openly weeping now, quiet, desperate sobs that she tried to stifle with her hand. They looked small, pathetic. Weeds torn from the soil, their roots exposed to the air. From my place on the stairs, I watched, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I felt no pity. I felt no anger. I felt only the clean, cold satisfaction of a long overdue pruning. Finally, Ms. Reed spoke again, her voice dropping, becoming even colder, if that were possible. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. Due to your documented conspiracy to defraud the primary stakeholder, your confessed intent to forge legal documents for financial gain, and your concerted actions contrary to the welfare of the designated director, your succession rights to Willow Creek Holdings, as outlined in Article 7, Section 4A of the bylaws, are hereby rendered null and void. She paused, letting the legal weight of the words sink in. As of this moment, per the execution of the dead hand provision, full and sole control of Willow Creek Holdings, its assets, its accounts, and all its properties transfers to its new and rightful director. David finally found his voice, a strangled, disbelieving whisper. What? What are you talking about? Director. My father left the house to me, to the family. Ms. Reed afforded him a look of profound, almost pitying contempt. It was the look one might give a particularly stupid insect. Your father, she clarified, left nothing to you personally. He placed all his assets, including this house, into a corporation whose directorship and all its attendant powers now belongs to your mother. She turned her head slightly, her gaze moving past them, past the opulent wreckage of their party, and for the first time, she looked directly towards the shadows of the hallway, directly at me. It was an acknowledgement, a signal. My performance was over. This isn't just her house, Mr. Miller, Miss Reed stated, her voice now a blade of ice. It's her corporation. She took a small, deliberate step toward them, and her voice dropped to an icy, lethal whisper that cut through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. And you, she said, are trespassing. I never set foot in the house again after Ms. Reed's masterclass in legal evisceration. I didn't need to. From a quiet hotel room, I watched the empire my husband had built, and that my son had tried to steal, dissolve like sugar in water. The house itself was the first thing to go. I had called it a beautiful tomb, and that's what it was. A gilded mausoleum for the woman I used to be. Every call with Marcus, my unseen partner in this quiet demolition, was a strange mix of business and absolution. He was a voice on a secure line, a ghost from Robert's past, and now the architect of my liberation. The Dufresne collection is fetching 8 figures, Chua, he'd say, his voice devoid of surprise. Robert always did have an eye for laundering with aesthetics. I didn't care about the numbers. They were abstractions, zeros on a screen that felt no more real than the life I had lived within those walls. What I cared about was the feeling of space being created. With every painting crated up and shipped away, with every piece of heavy, oppressive furniture sold at auction, a little more oxygen returned to the world. I imagined the hollow echoes in the grand foyer, a space once filled with the cloying scent of Karen's perfume and the sound of David's booming false laughter. Now, it was just an empty chamber, waiting to be forgotten. The offshore accounts were a different beast, a labyrinth of shell corporations and digital vaults Robert had constructed with serpentine genius. Marcus navigated them with a surgeon's precision. He built this to be a fortress, Chua, he explained one afternoon. But every fortress has a key. You were the key he never accounted for. As the funds were repatriated, consolidated, and cleaned, the sum grew to a size that felt more like a weight than a prize. It was, as the outline stated, obscene. It was the price of my silence, my complicity, my decades of tending a garden while a predator built a cage around it. The final piece of the plan was the most clinical. It was also the most elegantly cruel. I didn't need to lift a finger. I had hired the best, Miss Evelyn Reed handled it from her steel and glass office in Manhattan. I pictured her typing a single, encrypted email. No drama, no fanfare, just a quiet, digital arrow loosed into the heart of the federal government. An anonymous tip. A concerned citizen pointing out certain financial discrepancies, curious loan applications bearing a forged, unsteady signature. My signature. The tip suggested the IRS might want to look into the source of funds for David and Karen's lavish lifestyle, their new cars, their yacht club membership. It politely wondered how a mid-level executive and a non-practicing interior designer could afford such things. The result was immediate and catastrophic for them: a federal investigation, a freeze on all their assets. The yacht, the cars, the jewelry Karen so proudly flaunted, all of it became untouchable. Pending a review they could never possibly survive. Their world, built on my inheritance and their own greed, was put on ice. I didn't feel joy. And I didn't feel triumph. I felt balance. The scales, so long tipped against me, had finally settled. And then, I was gone. There was no dramatic final confrontation. There were no last words, no tearful goodbyes or shouted accusations. To give them that would be to give them a piece of me, and I had nothing left for them. My final act was not one of sound and fury, but of profound and total silence. I walked out of the hotel with a single small suitcase and a passport with my name on it. The name was all I kept. The money, that obscene fortune, became smoke. On Marcus's advice, it was wired through a dizzying series of accounts in jurisdictions that barely acknowledge each other's existence. It flowed from Zurich to Singapore, from the Caymans to Liechtenstein, fractioned and renamed, until its origins were as faint as a forgotten dream. I became a ghost, my financial footprint erased from the world I had left behind. I didn't look back. I bought a one-way ticket to a place I had only ever seen in botanical journals, a place where orchids grew wild on the bark of ancient trees. The last known image of me, I'm told, was captured by the grainy lens of an ATM camera in a small, sun-drenched town on the coast of Mexico. The machine was nestled in a crumbling adobe wall, shaded by a riot of bougainvillea. In the photo, a woman is withdrawing a small amount of cash. She is smiling, her face turned up towards the sun. The lines of grief and stress that had been carved into her features for decades were gone, smoothed away by the warm, humid air. She looked 10 years younger. She looked free. Time did what it always does. It passed. The seasons turned, grinding down the sharp edges of memory. I heard, through the quiet, infrequent channels Marcus maintained, what became of them. David and Karen lost everything. The federal investigation was a slow, methodical bleed. They were ruined, not just financially, but socially. The friends who had once flocked to their parties and admired their yacht now crossed the street to avoid them. They became radioactive, their names a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. They were forced to sell what little wasn't frozen to pay their lawyers, eventually moving into a cramped two-bedroom rental apartment in a town they once would have mocked. The walls smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap paint. I imagined Karen, who once complained about the thread count of her Egyptian cotton sheets, now staring at a water stain blooming on the particle board ceiling. I imagined David, who once commanded boardrooms, now flinching at the sound of his landlord knocking to demand the overdue rent. About a year after my disappearance, they did something I had half expected. They drove back. They took a trip down the long, winding road to what was once Willow Creek. Perhaps they were looking for a ghost of their own, a memory of the life they had thrown away. But the estate was gone. They didn't find a stately home waiting for a new family. They found a scene of total annihilation. A demolition crew was on site, tearing down the last standing wall of the main house. The structure that had been the center of their universe was now a pile of rubble and twisted rebar. But the true devastation lay beyond the house. The gardens. My life's work. My sanctuary. they were gone. Not just overgrown, not just neglected, but utterly erased. A fleet of bulldozers had scraped the earth clean. The rolling hills, the ancient oaks, the thousands of hours I had spent coaxing life from the soil, all of it had been flattened into a vast expanse of churned mud. The ground was scarred and raw, staked out with little orange flags, marking the plots for a new development of identical, soulless tract homes. They sat there, in their decade-old sedan, and stared at the empty space. They had fought so viciously for a kingdom, and all that was left was dirt. Their inheritance, the legacy they had been so desperate to claim, was now barren ground. My revenge was not destroying them. It was erasing the world in which they existed.